Axial Age, Philosophy, Religion, and Classical Thought, circa 800 to 300 BCE. Section 1, The Age of Questions. Between 800 and 300 BCE, the world entered one of the most intellectually explosive periods in human history. Across different regions, separated by mountains, deserts, rivers, seas, languages, and traditions, human beings began asking deeper questions about existence. What is justice? What makes a ruler legitimate? What is the self? What happens after death? What is the correct way to live? What is the source of suffering? What is the nature of reality? Can the universe be explained by reason? Can human society be governed by law, virtue, ritual, or force? This period is often called the Axial Age. The name was created by the modern philosopher Karl Jaspers. He used it to describe a broad transformation between roughly 800 and 200 BCE, when major philosophical and religious traditions developed in Greece, India, China, Iran, and the Eastern Mediterranean. But this was not one single worldwide movement. It was not a secret global awakening. It was not one civilization teaching all the others. Each region followed its own path. China faced political fragmentation after the weakening of Zhou royal authority. India saw the rise of new religious and philosophical movements in a world of kingdoms, towns, sacrifice, ascetics, and debate. Greece developed city-states, maritime trade, alphabetic writing, philosophy, history, medicine, theatre, and democracy. Iran produced one of the largest empires the world had yet seen. The Eastern Mediterranean became a world of Phoenician trade, alphabetic scripts, imperial pressure, exile, prophecy, and cultural exchange. In the Americas, major ceremonial centers developed independently, without contact with Greece, India, China, or Persia. The world did not become unified. But across many societies, old answers were challenged. Kings still ruled. Temples still stood. Priests still performed rituals. War still shaped history. But now philosophers, prophets, sages, physicians, historians, poets, and teachers began to examine the world in new ways. This was an age of crisis, an age of empire, an age of city-states, an age of sacred texts, an age of competing schools, an age when human beings began to place reason, ethics, law, ritual, liberation, and nature under intense examination. The world had become more complex, and in response the human mind became more searching. Section 2. Greek city-states and the world of the polis. Around 800 BCE, Greek-speaking communities were emerging from the long shadow of the Mycenaean collapse. The palaces of the Bronze Age were gone. The old administrative systems had disappeared. Writing had vanished from Greece for centuries. But gradually, new forms of society developed. The Greek polis began to take shape. A polis was more than a city. It was a political community. It included citizens, gods, temples, laws, assemblies, farmland, territory, memory, and identity. To belong to a polis was not only to live in a place, it was to participate in a civic world. During the 8th to 6th centuries BCE, Greek populations grew. Trade expanded. Maritime routes connected the Aegean with the wider Mediterranean and Black Sea. Greek communities established new settlements in southern Italy, Sicily, North Africa, the Black Sea region, and the western Mediterranean. These settlements were not provinces of one Greek empire. They were independent polis. Greek civilization became a network, not a single state. People shared language, gods, myths, festivals, poetry, athletic competitions, and artistic styles. But politically, they remained divided. Athens was not Sparta. Sparta was not Corinth. Corinth was not Thebes. Each polis had its own institutions, rivalries, laws, and identity. Sparta developed a distinctive system with kings, elders, assemblies, and a militarized citizen body supported by the labor of the helots. Athens passed through aristocratic rule, social crisis, tyranny, reform, and eventually democracy. Corinth became a major commercial and naval centre. Other Greek states were ruled by oligarchies, tyrants, or assemblies of different kinds. The polis fostered civic participation, but its freedoms were restricted. Women normally lacked formal political power. Enslaved people had no citizenship. Resident foreigners could live and trade in a city without becoming political members of it. The Greek polis created new forms of public life. But it was not modern equality. It was citizen freedom built on exclusion. In this world of rivalry, trade, law, and public debate, Greek culture became intensely competitive. Cities competed in war. Poets competed in performance. Athletes competed at festivals. Politicians competed in assemblies. Philosophers competed in argument. The polis created a stage on which public speech mattered. And from that stage, Greek political thought, drama, philosophy, and history would grow. Section 3. Eastern Zhou China and the Crisis of Order. While Greek city-states were forming around the Mediterranean, China entered a long age of political fragmentation. In 770 BCE, the Zhou court moved east after losing control of its western capital. This began the Eastern Zhou period. The Zhou kings still held ritual prestige. They remained symbols of ancient legitimacy, but real power increasingly belonged to regional states. The Eastern Zhou period is divided into two major phases. The Spring and Autumn period, from about 770 to 476 BCE, and the Warring States period, from about 475 to 221 BCE. As Zhou royal authority weakened, regional rulers became more independent. They fought wars, formed alliances, built walls, expanded bureaucracy, raised armies, collected taxes, reformed agriculture, competed for territory. Governments became more organized and more ruthless. Rulers needed better administrators, better generals, better laws, better tax systems, better ways to control land and people. Iron tools and weapons gradually became more important. Large infantry armies expanded. Canals and fortified cities developed. States began employing officials for ability and expertise, not only inherited aristocratic status. Political collapse produced intellectual urgency. If the old Zhou order had failed, what should replace it? Was the answer ritual, virtue, law, universal concern, natural spontaneity, state power, military discipline? This world gave rise to what later became known as the 100 Schools of Thought. Confucians argued for moral cultivation, ritual, family responsibility, and virtuous government. Mohists argued for practical benefit, social discipline, opposition to aggressive warfare, and impartial concern. Daoist thinkers questioned artificial ambition, rigid distinctions, and coercive government. Legalists emphasized clear laws, rewards, punishments, institutions, and the concentration of state power. These were not abstract debates isolated from society. They were responses to violence, to disorder, to failing kingship, to rulers looking for methods that worked. Chinese philosophy was born in a world where order had broken down. Its great question was not only, what is true? It was, how can human beings live together when the world is collapsing into war? Section 4. Homer and the Memory of Heroes. Between about 750 and 650 BCE, the Greek epics known as the Iliad and the Odyssey took increasingly recognizable form, but they were not invented from nothing in one generation. They came from a much older oral tradition. For centuries, poets had performed stories of gods, heroes, war, rage, homecoming, honor, death, and memory. These poems were shaped by formula, rhythm, repetition, and performance. A singer could draw on inherited lines and scenes. A warrior putting on armor, a feast, a ship setting sail, a hero speaking, a god intervening, a funeral, a battle. The Iliad centered on anger, honor, war, mortality, and grief during the legendary Trojan War. The Odyssey centered on return, endurance, cunning, hospitality, temptation, and homecoming. Together they became foundational texts of Greek culture. But Homer remains mysterious. Was Homer one poet? Two poets? A name attached to a tradition? A later cultural memory of many generations of singers? No one knows for certain. Even after alphabetic writing reached Greece, the poems continued to live through performance. They were not fixed instantly in one final version. They became standardized gradually over time. The epics mattered because they gave Greeks a shared heroic past. They taught about glory and its cost. They showed kings, warriors, women, slaves, strangers, gods, monsters, loyalty, rage, and loss. They became educational texts for later Greeks and Romans. To know Homer was to know the moral and emotional vocabulary of the Greek world. But the epics also raised questions that later philosophers would challenge. What is honor worth? Are heroes truly admirable? Do the gods act justly? Is war glorious or tragic? What kind of life should a human being seek? Before Greek philosophy argued in prose, Greek poetry had already given the world its deepest conflicts in song. Section 5. The Upanishads and the Inner Universe. Between approximately 700 and 500 BCE, some of the oldest major Upanishads developed within the Vedic tradition of South Asia. The earlier Vedic world had centered heavily on sacrifice, sacred speech, ritual fire, hymns, gods, priests, and cosmic order. But in the Upanishads, attention turned inward. The question was no longer only how to perform sacrifice correctly. It became, what is the self? What survives death? What is the ultimate reality behind the changing world? Why are beings reborn? Can knowledge liberate a person from death and rebirth? What is the relationship between the individual and the cosmos? The Upanishads were not written by one author. They preserved teachings attributed to multiple sages, teachers, students, kings, women thinkers, and ritual specialists. Among the figures who appear are Yajnavalkya, Gargi Vachaknavi, and Maitreyi. Their biographies cannot be reconstructed like modern lives, but their voices inside the texts represent a world of intense philosophical inquiry. Major concepts took shape. Atman, the deepest self or personal reality. Brahman, ultimate or cosmic reality. Karma, action and consequence. Samsara, repeated birth and death. Moksha, liberation from rebirth. The Upanishads did not teach one completely uniform doctrine. Some passages emphasize the identity of Atman and Brahman. Others explored consciousness, ritual, cosmology, death, breath, speech, and liberation in different ways. But the shift was profound. The sacred was not only in the fire altar, not only in the ritual, not only in the spoken hymn. it was also in consciousness, in the self, in the question of what lies beneath the surface of experience. This was one of the great intellectual revolutions of ancient South Asia. The universe was no longer only above, outside, and around humanity. It was also within. Section 6. Emperor Jimmu and Sacred Imperial Memory. Japanese tradition places the accession of Emperor Jimmu in 660 BCE. He is remembered as the first emperor of Japan and as a descendant of the solar deity Amaterasu. In the traditional story, he establishes rule in the Yamato region and becomes the sacred founder of the imperial line. But this is not securely documented 7th century BCE history. Modern historians do not accept the traditional chronology as literal. Recognizably centralized Yamato political power formed many centuries later. So why does Jimmu matter? Because founding myths matter. The story of Jimmu connected political authority to divine ancestry. It linked land, ruler, gods, and national memory. It gave the imperial house a sacred origin. It made kingship part of cosmic order. In many civilizations, rulers claimed descent from gods or chosen ancestors. Egyptian pharaohs were tied to divine kingship. Chinese rulers claimed the mandate of heaven. Mesopotamian kings ruled under the authority of gods. Japanese imperial tradition connected the ruler to Amaterasu, the sun goddess. Whether Jimmu was historical in the modern sense is not the point. The tradition became historically powerful because people believed it, repeated it, used it in ritual, and attached political identity to it. History is not only made of verifiable events, it is also made of sacred memory. And sacred memory can shape states long after the original story was formed. Section 7. Greek Natural Philosophy and the Search for First Principles. In the 6th and 5th centuries BCE, Greek thinkers began asking new kinds of questions about nature. What is the world made of? What is change? What remains constant beneath appearances? Can the cosmos be explained by principles rather than only mythic stories? These thinkers are often called pre-Socratics. Their writings survive mostly in fragments, quoted by later authors. But their questions changed intellectual history. Thales of Miletus was traditionally said to have proposed water as the underlying principle of nature. Anaximander proposed the apeiron, the indefinite or boundless origin from which things arise. Anaximenes treated air as a fundamental substance. Xenophanes criticized the idea that gods looked and behaved like human beings. Heraclitus emphasized change, conflict, and hidden order. Parmenides argued that genuine being could not truly arise or pass away, challenging ordinary assumptions about change. Empedocles proposed 4 elemental roots governed by forces of attraction and separation. Leucippus and Democritus developed early atomism, imagining reality as composed of indivisible atoms moving through void. It is too simple to say that these thinkers replaced myth with reason. Religion, poetry, and rational argument continued to overlap. But something important had changed. Natural processes became open to explanation. Explanations could be debated. Arguments could be challenged. The world was not only a stage for gods and heroes, it was a system with patterns. Greek natural philosophy helped create the habit of asking for general principles. Not only what happened, but why things happen. Not only who caused a storm, but what nature is. Not only which god rules the sky, but what the cosmos is made of. This was one of the roots of science. Not science in the modern experimental sense, but a new confidence that human reason could interrogate reality. Section 8. Buddhism and the Middle Way. In northern India, during approximately the 5th century BCE, a new religious and philosophical movement emerged around Siddhartha Gautama, remembered as the Buddha. The traditional dates place him between 563 and 483 BCE, but many modern scholars now consider those dates too early. Some place his death closer to 400 BCE. The exact chronology remains debated, but the world in which Buddhism emerged is clear. Northern India was changing. States were expanding. Towns were growing. Trade routes were active. Wealth, hierarchy, sacrifice, kingship, and urban life created new forms of pressure. Ascetics, teachers, and seekers questioned older ritual systems. They left households, practiced discipline, meditated, debated liberation, searched for release from suffering and rebirth. The Buddha taught within this wider ascetic culture. He rejected luxurious indulgence, but he also rejected extreme self-mortification. He taught a middle way. At the heart of his teaching was the problem of suffering or dissatisfaction. Life is marked by impermanence. Craving binds beings to suffering. Ignorance sustains the cycle. Liberation is possible. The path requires ethical conduct, disciplined mind, and insight. Teachings such as the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, dependent origination, karma, rebirth, non-self, and nirvana became central to Buddhist tradition. The Buddha also established a Sangha, a community of monastics and followers. But Buddhism did not immediately appear in its later forms. Theravada, Mahayana, and Vajrayana developed over centuries. Canons were compiled. Monastic institutions spread. Kings became patrons. Philosophical schools emerged. But in its early setting, Buddhism was a radical answer to a human question older than civilization. Why do we suffer? And can suffering end? The Buddha's answer was not conquest, not sacrifice, not wealth, not status, but awakening, discipline, compassion, insight, freedom from craving. In an age of kingdoms and violence, Buddhism turned attention toward the mind, suffering, and liberation. Section 9. Jainism and the Discipline of Non-Violence. Around the same broad period as Buddhism, Jainism also emerged as one of the great religious movements of northern India. Mahavira, traditionally dated to 599 to 527 BCE, is now often placed later by scholars, probably closer to the time of the Buddha. Like Buddhism, Jainism developed within a wider world of ascetics, renouncers, kingdoms, towns, debate, and spiritual discipline. Jain tradition teaches that Mahavira did not invent Jainism from nothing. He systematized and renewed an older path taught by earlier Tirthankaras, spiritual ford-makers, who showed the way across the river of rebirth. Jainism placed extraordinary emphasis on non-violence, ahimsa, not merely avoiding murder, but radical care toward living beings, truthfulness, non-stealing, celibacy or sexual discipline, non-attachment, ascetic restraint. Karma was understood not only as moral consequence, but as a subtle material burden binding the soul to rebirth. Liberation required purifying the soul through discipline, knowledge, and non-harm. Jain monks and nuns developed rigorous practices of restraint because every action could harm life. This produced one of the most demanding ethical traditions in world history. In a world of kings, sacrifice, expansion, and war, Jainism placed the value of life at the center. It asked humanity to see life everywhere, in animals, in insects, in plants, in beings too small to notice. Jainism reminds us that the Axial Age was not only about abstract philosophy, it was also about conduct. How should a person live? What does violence do to the soul? What does desire do to the mind? Can liberation be reached through radical discipline? In India, Buddhism and Jainism challenged older assumptions and helped create new religious paths whose influence would endure for more than 2,000 years. Section 10. Confucius and the Moral Repair of Society. From 551 to 479 BCE, according to traditional chronology, Confucius lived during the late spring and autumn period in China. He lived in a world of disorder. Zhou authority had weakened, regional rulers competed, old rituals were neglected or politicized, war and ambition disrupted society. Confucius looked backward and forward at the same time. He admired the moral order of the early Zhou, but he did not merely call for nostalgia. He taught that society could be repaired through ethical cultivation, education, ritual propriety, family responsibility, and virtuous government. Several concepts became central: renewed humaneness, benevolent concern for others, Li, ritual propriety, the right way to act within relationships, ceremonies, family and society, Yi, moral rightness, Xiao, filial respect, Yunzi, the cultivated or exemplary person. Confucius accepted hierarchy but not empty hierarchy. Authority came with responsibility. A ruler should rule through virtue and moral example, not only punishment. A father should be worthy of respect. A son should act with reverence. A minister should be loyal, but not blindly corrupt. Ritual was not mere ceremony. It trained the self. It shaped conduct. It connected the living with ancestors. It made social life meaningful. Confucius did not write one systematic book called Confucianism. The Analects were compiled by later followers. Later thinkers such as Mencius and Sunzi developed different interpretations of his legacy. Mencius emphasized the goodness of human nature and the cultivation of moral sprouts. Shunzi argued that human nature required discipline, ritual, and education to become good. Confucianism became a tradition of debate, not one frozen doctrine. Its central concern was order through moral formation. If rulers are virtuous, people will trust them. If families are ordered, society will stabilize. If rituals are practiced sincerely, human life will gain shape. If people cultivate themselves, government can become humane. Confucius was not seeking escape from society. He was seeking its repair. Section 11. Pythagoras and the Music of Number. Around 570 to 490 BCE, Pythagoras lived in the Greek world. Born on Samos, he later established a religious and philosophical community at Croton in southern Italy. Pythagoras wrote nothing that survives. Many stories about him come from later sources, making it difficult to separate the historical man from legend. The earliest evidence associates him with a disciplined way of life, a community, ritual practices, dietary rules, moral purification, the transmigration of the soul, the belief that the soul could be reborn. Later Pythagoreans became famous for connecting number with reality. They studied musical intervals. They found that harmony could be expressed through ratios. A string divided in certain proportions produced pleasing sounds. Music had number hidden inside it. From there, number seemed to reveal cosmic order, geometry, harmony, proportion, the structure of reality. The theorem bearing Pythagoras' name was known in practical form in earlier Babylonian mathematics, so it cannot be securely credited to Pythagoras personally. Many mathematical discoveries later attached to him likely belong to later Pythagorean thinkers, such as Philolaus and Archytas. But the importance of the Pythagorean tradition is real. It taught that number was not merely a tool for counting sheep, land, or trade. Number could reveal order. The cosmos itself could be mathematical. This idea would echo through Plato, later philosophy, astronomy, music theory, and science. In the Pythagorean imagination, reality was not random. It was structured, proportional, harmonious, a universe whose hidden order could be approached through mathematics and disciplined life. Section 12. Cyrus the Great and the Persian Empire. In 539 BCE, Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon. By then, he had already built the foundation of the Achaemenid Persian Empire through victories over Media and Lydia. Babylon was one of the great prizes of the ancient world, an old city of kings, temples, astronomers, scribes, and gods. When Cyrus entered Babylon, he did not present himself simply as a foreign destroyer. He used Babylonian royal language. He claimed legitimacy through the god Marduk. He portrayed the previous ruler, Nabonidus, as impious. The Cyrus cylinder described the conquest, the restoration of displaced cult statues, temple restoration, and the return of some deported peoples. It is sometimes called the first declaration of human rights. That is misleading. The cylinder was a royal inscription in Babylonian style. It was propaganda. But it was also historically important because it shows how Cyrus ruled. He worked through local traditions. He presented himself as restorer rather than destroyer. He incorporated conquered peoples into a broader imperial framework. The Achaemenid Empire became one of the largest empires the world had yet seen. It included many peoples, languages, cities, religions, economies, and landscapes. Later, Darius I would organize much of the empire's provincial administration, tribute systems, roads, and imperial ideology. But Cyrus set the model. Conquest combined with accommodation. Imperial power combined with local legitimacy. The Persian Empire would become one of the central forces of the ancient world. It would shape Mesopotamia, Egypt, Anatolia, the Levant, Iran, Central Asia, and the Greek world, whose conflict with Persia would become one of the defining struggles of classical history. Section 13. Athenian democracy and the limits of freedom. In 508 and 507 BCE, Athens underwent reforms associated with Cleisthenes. These reforms helped establish the central institutions of Athenian democracy. Athens had not always been democratic. It had passed through aristocratic rule, social conflict, reform, and tyranny. Solon had earlier introduced important reforms to address debt, class tension, and political participation. Pisistratus and his sons ruled as tyrants. Then, after political struggle, Cleisthenes reorganized the citizen body. He created new territorial groupings, strengthened the assembly, established the Council of 500, made broader citizen participation possible. Athenian democracy was direct. Male citizens gathered in assembly to vote on laws and policies. Councils prepared business. Large juries decided cases. Many offices were chosen by lot. Officials faced scrutiny. Ostracism allowed citizens to exile dangerous political figures. Generals were elected because their office required expertise. Later, under Pericles and others, payments helped poorer citizens participate in public service. But Athenian democracy had severe limits. Women could not vote. Enslaved people had no rights of citizenship. Resident foreigners, or metics, lacked political power. Citizens were only a minority of the population. Athens also ruled an empire. It demanded tribute from other Greek communities. It could be democratic at home and coercive abroad. This contradiction matters. Athenian democracy was revolutionary in its citizen participation, but it wasn't universal democracy. It was freedom for a defined citizen body built on the exclusion of many others. Still, its importance is enormous. Athens created a political culture where citizens debated law, war, finance, justice, leadership, and public policy. Speech became power. Persuasion became political force. The assembly became a battlefield of words, and from that world came some of the greatest works of drama, history, philosophy, and political thought ever written. Section 14. Daoism and the Way Beyond Control. During the 5th through 3rd centuries BCE, ideas later called philosophical Daoism emerged in China. Tradition speaks of Laozi as the author of the Tao Te Ching and as an older contemporary of Confucius. But Laozi's historicity and date remain uncertain. He may have been a historical teacher. He may represent memories of multiple teachers. He may be a legendary figure attached to a developing text. The Tao Te Ching took shape over time. Its ideas offered a powerful contrast to the political and moral programs of other schools. Where some thinkers sought order through ritual, law, punishment, or active reform, Taoist thought questioned the very impulse to force the world into artificial shape. The central idea was the Tao, the way, the underlying course of reality, not a personal God, not a law written in words, not a command issued by a ruler. The Tao is the natural unfolding of things. To live well is to move with it, not against it. Another major concept was Wu Wei, non-coercive action, non-forcing, acting in accordance with the natural flow rather than imposing rigid control. Taoist thought valued simplicity, spontaneity, humility, softness, emptiness, freedom from excessive desire. It often saw ambition, status, and artificial social complexity as sources of disorder. Zhuangzi, active in the late 4th century BCE, expanded Taoist thought through stories, paradoxes, humour, and philosophical play. He questioned fixed categories, human certainty, rigid distinctions between life and death, self and other, useful and useless, waking and dreaming. The Zhuangzi suggests that human beings mistake limited perspectives for ultimate truth. The world is transforming. Language is unstable. Freedom comes from loosening the grip of rigid judgment. Organized religious Taoist institutions developed much later. But philosophical Taoism already offered one of the most profound alternatives in ancient thought. It asked whether the world might be best understood not by forcing it into order, but by learning to move with its deeper pattern. Section 15. The Greco-Persian Wars. In 499 BCE, Greek cities in Ionia rebelled against Persian rule. Athens and Eretria gave limited support. The revolt failed, but it drew Persia's attention across the Aegean. The result was the Greco-Persian conflict. In 490 BCE, a Persian expedition landed at Marathon. An Athenian-led army defeated it. The victory became legendary, not because Persia was destroyed, but because a Greek city had stopped an imperial force on its own soil. 10 years later, the Persian king Xerxes launched a much larger invasion. In 480 BCE, at Thermopylae, Leonidas and a small Greek force delayed the Persian army. They did not win the battle. They were overwhelmed. But the stand became a symbol of courage and sacrifice. That same year, at Salamis, the Greek fleet defeated the Persian fleet in narrow waters. In 479 BCE, At Plataea, a Greek coalition defeated the remaining Persian land forces. At Mycale, Greek forces attacked Persian positions in Asia Minor. The Persian invasions of mainland Greece had failed. But the story needs precision. The Persian Empire was not destroyed. It remained powerful. Many Greek cities had supported Persia. Greek states were politically divided. The wider conflict continued until the mid-5th century. Still, the victories mattered. They prevented Achaemenid control of the principal mainland Greek states. They strengthened Athens. They helped create the naval alliance that would become the Athenian Empire. They gave Greek identity a powerful story of resistance. Persia became the great imperial other in Greek memory. But the conflict was not simply freedom versus tyranny. It was a struggle between divided Greek poleis and a massive imperial system, with ambition, fear, survival, propaganda, and power on all sides. The wars helped shape classical Greece, and classical Greece would help shape the intellectual history of the world. Section 16. Socrates and the Trial of the Questioner. Around 469 BCE, Socrates was born in Athens. He wrote no books. He left no treatise. He founded no school in the formal sense, and yet he became one of the most influential figures in the history of philosophy. We know Socrates mainly through others: Plato, Xenophon, Aristophanes, later traditions. These sources do not agree completely. Aristophanes mocked him as a strange intellectual. Xenophon presented him as practical and moral. Plato turned him into the central figure of philosophical drama. The historical Socrates is difficult to separate from the literary Socrates, but his method remains famous. He asked questions. What is justice? What is courage? What is piety? What is virtue? What is knowledge? People thought they knew. Socrates pressed them. He asked for definitions, tested assumptions, exposed contradictions, forced people to confront the weakness of their own certainty. This method became known as the elenchus. Socrates did not claim to possess easy answers. He made ignorance visible. For him, the unexamined life was not worthy of a human being. Philosophy became moral self-examination. But Athens was politically wounded. The Peloponnesian War had damaged the city. Oligarchic coups had created fear and revenge. Some of Socrates' associates were linked to anti-democratic politics. In 399 BCE, Socrates was tried for impiety and corrupting the young. He was convicted. He accepted the death sentence. He drank hemlock. Socrates' death became a turning point. A city famous for free speech executed a man for questioning. His students inherited a problem that still haunts philosophy. What happens when truth challenges society? What happens when a citizen obeys conscience over public opinion? What is the duty of a thinker in a wounded city? Socrates died, but the questions did not. Section 17. Hippocrates and the natural body. During the 5th and 4th centuries BCE, the medical tradition associated with Hippocrates developed in the Greek world. Hippocrates became the symbolic father of medicine. But the Hippocratic corpus was not written by one man. It contains around 60 texts written by multiple authors over centuries. These writings do not always agree with one another. Still, they represent an important shift in medical thought. The body could be observed. Symptoms could be recorded. Disease could be studied through natural causes. Diet, environment, water, climate, and lifestyle mattered. Physicians could make prognoses. They could compare cases. They could think systematically about illness. This did not completely remove religion from healing. Greek healing still included temples, prayer, and divine interpretation. And Hippocratic medicine accepted theories, especially humoral theory, that modern medicine no longer accepts. But its commitment to observation mattered. A patient was not only a victim of divine anger. A fever was not only a curse. A disease had patterns. The physician had a method. The Hippocratic Oath also became famous, though it was not necessarily written by Hippocrates himself, and does not contain the exact phrase, "First do no harm." Its importance lies in the idea that medicine carries ethical responsibility. The physician holds power over the vulnerable. That power must be restrained by duty. In the same age when philosophers questioned justice and rulers claimed divine authority, physicians were learning to question the body, to observe it, to treat it, to make medicine a discipline of careful attention. Section 18. The Peloponnesian War and the Breaking of Greece. From 431 to 404 BCE, the Greek world tore itself apart. Athens and Sparta led rival alliance systems. Athens had sea power, wealth, walls, and empire. Sparta had land power, discipline, and the Peloponnesian alliance. The war spread across the Greek world. It was not one campaign. It was decades of invasion, plague, siege, rebellion, diplomacy, betrayal, and exhaustion. Early in the war, a plague struck Athens. Pericles died. The city's confidence was shaken. Athens continued fighting. Sparta invaded Attica. Athens used its navy. A temporary peace failed. Alcibiades rose, defected, returned, and remained one of the most controversial figures of the war. Then came the Sicilian expedition. Athens sent a massive force to attack Syracuse. It ended in disaster. Ships destroyed, soldiers killed or enslaved. Ambition turned into ruin. Persia later provided financial support to Sparta. Sparta built a fleet. At Aegospotami, the Athenian navy was destroyed. In 404 BCE, Athens surrendered. The Athenian Empire was gone. Sparta imposed an oligarchic regime known as the 30 Tyrants, though democracy was later restored. The war did not end Greek civilization, but it broke the old balance. It weakened the city-states. It damaged populations, economies, trust, and political stability. It opened the way for later Spartan, Theban, and Macedonian dominance. Thucydides wrote one of the most powerful historical analyses of the conflict. He examined fear, interest, power, plague, leadership, civil conflict, and the logic of empire. His speeches were literary reconstructions, not transcripts, but his analysis changed history writing. He did not merely record events, he searched for causes. The Peloponnesian War showed the dark side of the polis. The same civic energy that created democracy, drama, and philosophy could also produce imperial arrogance, factional violence, and self-destruction. Section 19, Plato and the Academy. Plato was born around 428 or 427 BCE. He lived through the aftermath of the Peloponnesian War, the trial of Socrates, and the instability of Greek politics. He was Socrates' student. And after Socrates' execution, Plato turned philosophy into written drama. His dialogues ask what justice is, what knowledge is, what virtue is, what love is, what beauty is, what the soul is, what education should do, what kind of state can produce good human beings. In the Republic, Plato imagined a city ordered by reason, education, and philosophical rule. He explored the difference between appearance and reality, opinion and knowledge, the changing world and stable truth. His discussions of forms became central to later metaphysics, the form of beauty, the form of justice, the form of the good. But Plato did not present one perfectly fixed doctrine across all his works. His dialogues question, revise, dramatize, and explore. He also founded the Academy at Athens. It became one of the most influential centers of philosophical and mathematical study in the ancient Mediterranean world. Plato's philosophy was shaped by a crisis. He had seen democracy execute Socrates. He had seen oligarchy become violent. He had seen war damage the Greek world. So he asked a dangerous question. What if politics cannot be trusted unless the soul is educated? For Plato, philosophy was not merely abstract thought. It was preparation for living rightly, and perhaps for ruling rightly. His answers remain debated, but the questions he asked became permanent. Section 20. Aristotle and the Ordering of Knowledge. Aristotle was born in 384 BCE. He studied at Plato's Academy. Later, he founded his own school in Athens, the Lyceum. Where Plato often looked toward ideal forms, Aristotle turned with extraordinary intensity toward classification, observation, causes, and systems. His surviving works cover an enormous range: logic, metaphysics, physics, biology, psychology, ethics, politics, rhetoric, poetry. He helped formalize deductive reasoning through syllogistic logic. He examined causation, substance, change, purpose, and explanation. In ethics, he argued that human flourishing, or eudaimonia, comes through the cultivation of virtue. A good life is not a single act. It is a practiced character. In biology, Aristotle and his associates observed animals, compared species, examined anatomy, reproduction, and behavior. His biological works became the first surviving large-scale systematic study of animals. But Aristotle was not always right. He made empirical errors. He defended hierarchy. He accepted slavery and the political subordination of women. His science was later revised, challenged, and overturned in many places. His importance is not that every conclusion was correct. His importance is that he organized inquiry. He asked how knowledge itself should be structured. What counts as explanation? What makes an argument valid? What is the purpose of a living thing? What is a good life? What is the best political community possible? Aristotle became one of the great architects of intellectual history. For centuries, his categories shaped philosophy, science, theology, ethics, and education. He represents the Axial Age impulse at its most systematic, the desire not only to ask questions, but to classify the world of answers. Section 21. Empires, Prophets, Alphabets, and Coins. The Axial Age was not only philosophy, it was also empire, exile, trade, money, writing, and sacred reform. The Neo-Assyrian Empire dominated much of Western Asia during the 8th and 7th centuries BCE. It used provincial administration, tribute, military conquest, siege warfare, and mass deportation. Assyria was brutal, efficient, and deeply organized. Its expansion reshaped the ancient Near East. In 722 to 721 BCE, Assyria conquered the northern kingdom of Israel. Later, the Neo-Babylonian Empire rose after Assyria's fall. In 587 to 586 BCE, Babylon destroyed Jerusalem and deported many Judahites. These catastrophes profoundly reshaped Israelite and Judahite religion. Prophets such as Amos, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel linked political disaster with covenant, injustice, idolatry, social oppression, and divine judgment. Religion became a way of interpreting history. Defeat was not only military, it was moral. The destruction of Jerusalem forced new questions. How can a people survive without a king, without a temple, in exile? What does covenant mean after catastrophe? These questions shaped biblical literature and later Jewish identity. Meanwhile, Phoenician cities spread maritime commerce across the Mediterranean. Their consonantal alphabet influenced the Greek alphabet. The Greek alphabet later influenced Etruscan and Latin writing. Carthage, founded by Phoenician settlers in North Africa, became a major commercial and political power. Alphabetic writing made literacy easier than older systems with hundreds of signs, though literacy still remained limited. Near the end of the 7th century BCE, standardized stamped coinage appeared in Lydia and Ionia. Coins did not invent money. People had long used weighed metal, grain, credit, and barter. But coins standardized value in portable form. They helped with taxes, military wages, trade, payments, and state authority. In Nubia, the kingdom of Kush rose to extraordinary power. During the 8th century BCE, Kushite rulers conquered Egypt and established the 25th dynasty. This showed that Nile civilization was not only Egyptian. Nubia was a center of power, religion, and kingship in its own right. In Italy, Etruscan cities flourished and strongly influenced early Rome. Roman tradition places the founding of the Republic in 509 BCE, though early Roman history blends evidence with legend. Across the world, states were experimenting with power through conquest, writing, exile, coins, alphabets, law, prophecy, and royal ideology. The Axial Age was not only a revolution of thought, it was a revolution of institutions. Section 22, the Americas, Olmec, Zapotec, and Shavian worlds. While Greece, India, China, Persia, and the Near East produced philosophical and imperial transformations, major civilizations were also developing independently in the Americas. In Mesoamerica, the Olmec world flourished until around 400 BCE. Olmec centers such as San Lorenzo and La Venta produced monumental architecture, ritual spaces, jade objects, long-distance exchange, and colossal stone heads. These massive heads carved from stone remain among the most recognizable monuments of ancient America. The Olmec were not a single simple culture frozen in time. They were part of a wider pattern of political, ritual, artistic, and economic development along the Gulf Coast. Around 500 BCE, Monte Alban emerged in Oaxaca as a major Zapotec center. Built on a leveled mountaintop, Monte Alban became a ceremonial and political center overlooking surrounding valleys. It shows the rise of complex society in southern Mexico with monumental architecture, public spaces, and regional power. In the Andes, Chavín de Huántar became a major ceremonial center. Its art, architecture, ritual spaces, and religious imagery influenced wide regions. Chavín religion used powerful animal imagery, including jaguars, serpents, birds of prey, and transformed human-animal beings. The Americas show that complex religious and political centers did not need influence from the Old World. They developed independently. They created their own sacred geographies, their own artistic languages, their own institutions, their own forms of authority. The Axial Age, if used globally, must remember this. Human complexity was not limited to Eurasia. Across oceans, societies were asking their own questions through stone, ritual, landscape, and power. Section 23. Alexander and the Hellenistic World. In 356 BCE, Alexander was born in Macedon. His father, Philip II, had already transformed Macedon into a powerful military state. Philip reformed the army, dominated the Greek polis, and prepared for war against Persia. Alexander inherited that army, that ambition, that opportunity. In 334 BCE, Alexander crossed into Asia and began his campaign against the Achaemenid Empire. He conquered Asia Minor, Syria, the Levant, Egypt, Mesopotamia, Iran, parts of Central Asia, and the northwestern Indian subcontinent. He defeated Darius III and destroyed the Achaemenid imperial dynasty. But conquest was not clean glory. It involved sieges, massacres, burned cities, military terror, political calculation, diplomacy, intermarriage, and the use of existing imperial systems. Alexander did not simply spread Greek culture over passive peoples. He entered worlds with older civilizations: Egyptian, Persian, Mesopotamian, Central Asian, Indian, Jewish, Phoenician, Anatolian. He founded cities, used local administrators, adopted elements of Persian court practice, married into Eastern elites, encouraged some forms of cultural fusion, and angered many of his Macedonian followers. When Alexander died in Babylon in 323 BCE, his empire broke apart. His generals fought over the inheritance. The major successor kingdoms emerged: Ptolemaic Egypt, the Seleucid Empire, Antigonid Macedonia. This was the Hellenistic world, a world of Greek language and local traditions, of new cities and old temples, of Egyptian gods and Macedonian kings, of Babylonian astronomy and Greek mathematics, of Jewish communities under Hellenistic rule, of trade across wider networks, of libraries, scholars, mercenaries, migrants, and hybrid identities. Alexander destroyed the Persian imperial order. But he also created centuries of cultural interaction. The Hellenistic world was not one-directional. It was exchange, conflict, fusion, resistance, adaptation, a new age born from conquest but shaped by many peoples. Section 24. Closing. The human mind turns on the world. Between 800 and 300 BCE, humanity entered an age of profound questioning. Greek polis created new forms of civic identity and public debate. Eastern Zhou China turned political fragmentation into philosophical competition. Homeric poetry preserved heroic memory. The Upanishads explored the self, ultimate reality, karma, rebirth, and liberation. Japanese imperial tradition remembered Jimmu as a sacred founder. Greek natural philosophers searched for first principles. Buddhism and Jainism offered paths beyond suffering, violence, and rebirth. Confucius taught moral government, ritual, and humanness. Pythagoreans found cosmic order in number and harmony. Cyrus built an empire that ruled through conquest and accommodation. Athens developed democracy for male citizens while excluding most of its population. Taoist thinkers questioned control and praised the way. Greek coalitions resisted Persian invasions. Socrates questioned virtue and died for philosophy. Hippocratic medicine studied the body through observation. The Peloponnesian War shattered Greek political confidence. Plato founded the academy and searched for justice, knowledge, and reality. Aristotle organized logic, biology, ethics, politics, and knowledge itself. Assyrian and Babylonian empires reshaped the Near East. Prophetic traditions transformed disaster into moral history. Phoenician alphabets changed writing. Coinage changed exchange. Kush ruled Egypt. Etruscans shaped early Rome. Olmec, Zapotec, and Chavin centers rose in the Americas. Alexander conquered the Persian Empire and opened the Hellenistic world. This was not one universal awakening, it was many societies confronting crisis: war, empire, inequality, death, political collapse, moral uncertainty, social change, and in response they created new ways of thinking. Some turned inward toward the self. Some turned upward toward heaven or ultimate reality. Some turned outward toward nature. Some turned toward law. Some toward ritual. Some toward liberation. Some toward reason. Some toward empire. Some toward democracy. Some toward the ruler. Some toward the path beyond rulers. The Axial Age matters because its questions did not die. They still shape the world. What is justice? What is a good life? What is the role of the state? What is the nature of the self? How should rulers rule? How should people live? Can suffering end? Can reason understand nature? Can law restrain power? Can morality survive war? Can human beings become wise? By 300 BCE, the world had changed. Classical thought had taken root. Empires had expanded. Religions had formed. Philosophical schools had begun. Sacred texts had deepened. Political experiments had risen and failed. And the human mind had turned upon the world with a new intensity. The next chapters of history would build on these foundations. Rome would rise. India would see the Mauryan Empire. China would move toward imperial unification. Buddhism would spread. Hellenistic kingdoms would reshape the Eastern Mediterranean and Western Asia. Judaism would continue developing under imperial rule. And philosophy would remain one of humanity's deepest tools for confronting existence. This was the age of questions. The age when civilizations began not only to record the world, rule the world, and fight over the world, but to ask what the world means and what humanity should become inside it.